So, welcome back, everyone, to this last part of PhD Day. And this year, I'm so thankful to UIO-Doc, to Tekna, to the Department of Physics and the faculty for making it possible for us to invite the creator of PhD comics, Jorge Cham, back to the science library. So let me see if I can get this right this time around. We all know Cham as a cartoonist, but it's not going to be a surprise for you that he's one of us. He too. And he has a PhD in mechanical engineering from Stanford University, and he has worked at Caltech on neural prosthetics. Cham has been in Norway before, and this is his second time at the Science Library. He was actually here for the first PhD Day in 2014 as well. And this year he's going to talk about life as a PhD. And I also have to mention, since we are at the library, that he has a new book out, the book We Have No Idea. So he might mention that as well. After his talk, he has generously offered to show us PhD Movie 2. So stay here for a great time tonight. The pub is open, and I hope you all have a great time. Please welcome the man who saved millions of PhD students. Please, Jorge Cham, the stage is yours. Oh.
Hello. How's it going? Good. All right. You don't sound very excited. I'll try it again. How's it going? Great! All right. Not much better. But I'll take what I can get. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Science Library for inviting me here today, and Caroline, and everyone who's been organizing this and doing this great event for all of you. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Yeah. And also thank all of you for coming to this event. I know that it's Friday afternoon, it's 4 p.m. It's a beautiful day here for Norway. But yeah, it's Friday at 4. I'm sure at this hour, most of you would much rather, be in the lab, in your offices, working hard, starting your day. But instead, you came here to procrastinate with us, so thank you. Well, let me get a sense of who's here. How many of you here are PhD students? Raise your hand. Whoa, nice. Do we have any undergraduate students here, university-level students? Ooh. Run. How about professors? Any faculty, professors here? Oh, good. All right. Wow, you raised your hand really high. It's very brave of you. Security, can we escort them out, please? I would also ask about postdocs, but I think they're used to being ignored. Apparently, nobody even invited them. Oh, there's one. All right. There you go. He's like, ooh. Good. So it's an honor for me to be back here again. And I am going to be giving a very similar talk to last time, because last time was 3 years ago. And I imagine anyone who was here back then probably already graduated, right? You don't have to raise your hand. It's okay. But yeah, what I'm going to talk about today is just my experiences as a PhD student. So I was a PhD student at Stanford University. And I was there for about several years. And in fact, my research, my thesis, focused on making these small robots that can run like cockroaches. Yeah, so here's a quick movie of what these robots look like. Yeah, so I like to show this movie at every presentation I give for two reasons. First of all, I feel like this movie really kind of captures what it feels like to be a PhD student. You probably know the feeling by now. You feel like you're running the whole time, but you're not getting anywhere. Meanwhile, there's a more intelligent being stamping you down. But I also like to show the movie because it's really the only way that anyone will look at my research. Gotcha. Because a little bit more popular than the research I spent years working on as part of my actual career, a little bit more popular has been what I was doing when I should have been doing research, when I was procrastinating, which was to make these comic strips called Piled Higher and Deeper, or PhD comics. And so how that started for me was that I was my first year in graduate school, and I saw this advertisement in the newspaper asking students to come up with ideas for comics. And I remember thinking at the time that, there are a lot of stories about being a PhD student, being a young scientist, a young academic, a lot of stories that you really didn't see anywhere else in popular culture. Most of the movies and TV shows, they're always about cops, right? Police, and all the dramas on television, they're always about lawyers or doctors or, the real doctors. The kind that help people directly. But I also started to think about PhD students, right? And so I asked myself the question, who is this strange creature called the PhD student, the graduate student? What is happening inside of that complex brain and complicated mind? And it turned out that apparently, apparently it's not that complicated. And I mean that in the sense that most of the PhD students that I knew when I was going through it weren't these kind of crazy, eccentric, obsessive, weird caricatures of people that you always see portrayed whenever they try to feature a scientist or a researcher or just anyone who happens to be smart. They always resort to these kind of weird, odd types of people. Whereas most of the people that I knew in the PhD, they were really just kind of regular people, We're mostly just trying to survive the experience. And so that's what these comics became about. They became about meeting with your professors and having to do a little begging to get them to hire you. The comics were also about being a teaching assistant. And having to teach those annoying undergraduates. I'm sure the three of you are cool. But yeah, the comics were also about late-night project sessions. They were about learning graduate student etiquette. Never ask a PhD student how their research is going. It's bad form. Let's see, it was also about oral exams or oral presentations. Good times, good times. And then eventually, other characters started to appear in the comics, including Cecilia, one of the brave 5 to 10% of women in some fields like computer science or physics or electrical engineering. And then also there was the token humanities graduate student, Tejal, who's always protesting something. And then, of course, we had that guy or girl that everybody seems to have in their departments. The one that's been there longer than anyone can remember. In this case, it's Mike Slack and Ernie. Again, you don't have to raise your hand here. Your secret is safe. Yeah, Mike, who, as the older PhD student in the group, his job is to educate the new students in the way of the PhD. So exactly, money and social life a shame, a PhD student needs not such things. Now, this sounds crazy, but this was actually said to me my first year by this older student called Mike. So it's not fiction. I don't make a lot of this stuff up. And then, Mike, like maybe a lot of you here today, you not only have to manage the expectations of your professors, right? But you also have to manage your significant others and what they expect from you. So yeah, these are comics that I just drew as a graduate student, like a lot of you here today, on the side as a hobby. And I think people who read it there liked it, I think, not just maybe because of the characters or because they could identify with the situations. I think people responded to it because the subtext of the comics, kind of the secret message of the comics, was always about asking the real question about a PhD, the big question, which is, why? Why do you put up with all of that, right? Because I'm pretty sure that nobody in this room really came for the PhD for the money. So back then, I got curious, and I asked myself, I wonder how much they pay graduate students to be graduate students in the United States. And I looked up the salaries for all of these disciplines, for teaching assistants, research assistants, over all of the schools in the US. And what's interesting is if you take the average of all of these numbers, you get a figure equal to $14,055. That's a kind of general idea, you know, of how much they pay PhD students in the United States per year. Which is, you know, I guess, it's not bad. I mean, you could maybe pay for 1 month of rent here in Oslo. or you could eat if it's not that bad if you eat at McDonald's every day. But to put it into perspective, I thought, hey, let's compare this salary to how much they would be paying you if you worked at McDonald's. Earning the minimum wage in California, how much they make a year, that turns out to be, should I stop here? Should I? All right, thank you very much. That was very easy. No, that figure turned out to be, yes! Woo! $15 less. Yeah. I'm loving it. A few years more recently, I thought, hey, I wonder if that figure has changed. I wonder if they get paid more now. And it turns out that that figure has changed over the years. Now it's more like $18,779, which is better. Until that year, I also looked up how much the US government will pay you if you file for unemployment. It turned out that figure is equal to... That's right. This conclusively proves it pays more to do nothing than it does to do whatever it is that you're doing right now. So yeah, that didn't make a lot of sense. But then what I did was I took my procrastination to the next level. And I started posting all of these comics on the internet on a free web server on campus. And on the ones in the newspaper, I would put the web address. And so I think what happened was, as most things on the internet these days, somebody saw it and liked it and told their friends in other universities, and then those people told their friends in other universities, and those people told other people in other universities. And so kind of like a virus, these comics went out into the world. And it was actually very interesting to find out that these stories, these situations that I was writing about, apparently weren't just limited to Stanford University. Oh no. Apparently, it's a global phenomenon. So that's a list of all of the universities of the people who subscribed to the website up until a few years ago. And it was also very interesting to find out it wasn't just limited to computer science or robotics or engineering, which is where I was getting my PhD. People from all kinds of disciplines were reading these comics. So this is a list of all those people's majors, just going from about A to about C, just to kind of give you a sense of who's reading these comics. And I like to read some of them because they're kind of interesting. Like, what do we have here? Art history, graduate students are reading this, and brain and cognitive scientists are reading this, and what is Buddhist studies? Known as BS. I guess you can get a PhD in BS, officially. So that was pretty cool, that was pretty interesting, but even more interesting was when I started to hear back from all these people. I got feedback from all these people across the world, across all these different departments, and I can roughly categorize the emails I get into these 4 types of emails. So the first type of email I usually get goes something like this. I'll wake up in the morning, I'll check my email, and there's usually a message that says something like, "Oh God, I break down and cry each time there's a new comic. I don't know whether to laugh or cry." So that makes me feel good, knowing that making thousands of people out there in the world weep. Yeah, you're welcome. But again, people also thank me for drawing the comics. They'll write and they say, "Jorge, thank you for drawing the comics and helping me goof off. I'm supposed to be doing work, but instead I just spent days surfing your website." And so that also makes me feel good. I'm pretty sure somewhere in the world there was probably a graduate student about to make an incredible discovery for humankind. And they were in the lab about to make this discovery when suddenly their lab mate goes, "Hey, have you checked out this website?" And humanity took a step backwards. Yeah, thanks to me. You're welcome. But then I get a third type of comment through the website. It usually goes something like, "Cecilia is so hot. Can I marry her?" And so this type of comment disturbs me. Right? It's kind of weird, right? Because first of all, she's an imaginary cartoon character. And second of all, she's my imaginary girlfriend. So back off. Make up your own imaginary girlfriends. Or boyfriends, of course, yeah. Or both. We are in Norway. I don't really know what that means. But apparently some of you do. Anyways, let's see what else. Yes, that's right. She's my imaginary girlfriend. Also the mother of my imaginary child. So, okay, that went too far. But then I get a fourth type of comment. It usually goes something like, "You make me feel less alone. Your comic is probably responsible for keeping many of us sane." And so when I get this type of comment, I usually think, "Aw, you know, maybe, just maybe, this isn't just all a huge waste of time for humankind. You know, maybe, just maybe, it's just kind of a medium-sized waste of time." Because I was reading this survey they did once at the University of California at Berkeley, where they sent a questionnaire to all their graduate students asking about their mental health. And so they sent this survey out to all the grad students, and they asked them about their mental health, and this is what they found. They found, first of all, that 95% of all graduate students, 95%, reported having felt overwhelmed or overstressed at some point in their graduate career. 95%. That's crazy, right? That's insane. I mean, you're probably thinking, who are these other 5%? Why are they lying? I just figured it out. They're probably Buddhist studies. But a little bit more serious, they also found in this report, they found that 67%, so 2 out of every 3 graduate students at some point feels hopeless or depressed about their research, about their academic careers, about their lives, 67%. So this figure is a little bit more serious. It's not something, hopelessness and depression, they're not things we should take too lightly. Which is why I am here today, to tell all of you that there is an alternative, there is another way, and that is the way of procrastination. That's right, procrastination. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking right now, which is, Jorge, procrastination, but that's a bad thing, right? Sex, drugs, procrastination. My mother doesn't know I do any of those things. But I think procrastination just gets a bad reputation. It gets a bad rap. It gets a bad reputation. And I think it gets a bad reputation because I think people often confuse procrastination with its very close cousin, its very close relative, which is laziness. But I actually argue that procrastination and laziness are not the same thing. Not the same thing, right? I mean, laziness, that's when you don't want to do anything. Procrastination, you just don't want to do it now. I'll let that sink in for a minute. It's not the same thing, procrastination and laziness. And in fact, if you look it up in the dictionary, all it says is that it's to postpone or delay needlessly, which kind of sounds like a negative thing. But I think maybe it actually just gives us a loophole. Because if you can find the need for it, maybe it's not so bad. And do they have this word procrastination here in Norway? Or, yeah, okay. I know I tried this in Germany and they did not have that word. They were like, what? What is that? I didn't know. Italy, they knew, totally. Germany, not so much. And in fact, I think there are many instances throughout history where I think procrastination has actually worked out for the best. So here's a list of famous procrastinators in history. This is more of my research. Famous procrastinators in history, starting with going all the way back to Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton and the story of how the apple fell on him. I think the real question here is, what was he doing under that tree? You know, he certainly wasn't in the lab working, was he? Then there's also the story of Albert Einstein. You know, I bet Einstein's mother would have really loved for him to have worked hard at the patent office where he had his real job and made his way up to middle management, just like he was supposed to do for his actual career. But instead, Einstein spent a lot of time working on physics equations, kind of on the side, which, you know, kind of worked out for Albert, relatively speaking. I apologize for that joke. Let's see, who else? There's a famous science fiction writer, Isaac Asimov. I don't know how many of you know this, but Asimov, it took him 10 years to get his PhD in chemistry. 10 years to get his PhD in chemistry from Columbia University. Yeah. So that's a picture of Asimov before getting his PhD. Here's a picture of him after the PhD. Before, after, what happened? Yeah, in fact, Asimov, later on in his life, he wrote in his autobiography, in his memoirs, he wrote that when he was a graduate student, his professor, his direct advisor, actually told him to his face that he was a bad writer, that he didn't know how to write well at all. And despite that, he spent a lot of time working on what turned out to be some of the most significant science fiction novels of the whole century. Now, a few more modern heroes of procrastination, I think, are the Yahoo and the Google guys. Is there anyone in the room here today who does not use Yahoo or Google for your research? Yeah, so actually both companies were started by graduate students, by PhD students. And in fact, legend has it that Jerry Yang and David Filo's advisor just happened to go on sabbatical when one of them said to the other, "Hey, our professor's not here right now. I have an idea. Why don't we try to categorize the entire internet before he comes back?" That is some legendary procrastination there. Yeah. You're probably thinking, what is Yahoo? I don't understand. I don't know this thing you call Yahoo. Young people. Yeah, there's also, I think, not just historical data, but there's also, I think, real scientific data that makes the case for procrastination. So, for example, there's the work by the cognitive psychologist Teresa Amabile, who did experiments that showed that things she calls extrinsic motivators, so outside pressures, like when someone's telling you that you have to do something or you should do something or you're supposed to do something because of a deadline or a reward, or even if they tell you at the end there's going to be an award, it actually tends to make people feel more controlled and tends to decrease their ability to think creatively. A little bit more recent and more high-tech is they looked at people's brain activity while they're trying to solve problems that require insight. And so the hypothesis here is that when you're trying to come up with insightful solutions to kind of open-ended, difficult problems, what you're trying to do in your head is you're trying to make connections within your brain that are not already obviously connected. You try to connect concepts that are not already obviously connected. And so their hypothesis here is that when you're trying to come up with these ideas and make those connections, what you need is actually this kind of low-grade, almost unconscious brain activity. So that if you actually think about your problem too much or you focus on it too hard, you can actually suppress some of this important connection making. Yes, that's right. I have references in my slides. It's not just cartoons. And I even have like et al. And everything. Look at this. Totally legit. Yeah, so there's all this history and all this science behind procrastination. Still, it has a very negative feeling about it, right? Negative stigma about it in society, and I feel especially sometimes in academia. So then I asked myself the question, why is that? You know, what's really the problem with procrastination? And so I asked myself this question, and I thought about it for a long time. A long time. You might say I procrastinated coming up with the answer. But I thought about this question for a long time, and then one day I sort of realized that maybe the answer to this question, maybe it has something to do with this very typical conversation that I always find myself having with PhD students, with graduate students, even with professors sometimes. Anywhere I go, anywhere in the world, this conversation usually goes something like this. You go up to a graduate student or an academic and you say, "Hey, how's it going?" And most people sort of respond with the same enthusiasm you guys responded with. Something along the lines of, "Oh God, I'm so stressed, I'm trying to graduate, I have all these things I have to do, I've only been sleeping 3 hours a night." And so you go, "Whoa, that's crazy, that's insane. You're only sleeping 3 hours a night? That's crazy. I mean, that must mean that you're doing research 21 hours a day?" And they usually respond something like, no. No, I went out, I watched TV, I goofed around, I'm organizing this event for the campus. Pick your favorite obscure hobby you learn in graduate school. Club, because I'm the club president. And so you go, oh. And then they go, but I should be doing research. I'm supposed to be working right now. And so I thought, aha, the real problem here is not that there aren't enough hours in the week to do all your work and to pursue all your hobbies and your interests. The real problem here seems to be all about guilt. And I always get a nice, uncomfortable silence here. Everyone's going, Right? Guilt. Because as you may have found out, the thing about academia and research and getting your PhD, the thing about it is that it sort of never ends, right? There's always, at any given time of the day, any day of the week, there's always something else that you could be doing for your research. There's always more papers you could be reading, more references you could be looking up, more funding you could be applying for, more talks, more data you could be examining, more experiments you could be doing, more talks you could be giving, more equipment you could be fixing. Whereas I think maybe people with sort of more regular 9-to-5 jobs, it's maybe a little bit easier for them to just go home at the end of the day and then just relax. In academia, there's this constant anxiety, right, of feeling like there's always something else that you could be doing, that you should be doing, that you're supposed to be doing. And yet, a lot of the times, you kind of find yourself basically basically not doing these things. And so I think it's this constant anxiety, this constant struggle that maybe contributes to a lot of graduate students, a lot of PhD students kind of burning out a little bit early in their careers. And so then I asked myself the question, why is that, Like if we feel like we have all these things that we should be doing, that we're supposed to be doing, that we could be doing all the time, why can't we just do them? Why can't we just do the things we're supposed to do instead of doing other things? And then you feel guilty and depressed about them to the point where you don't even enjoy those things you used to enjoy before. Well, I thought about this question also for a long time. And I thought about it for a while, and then I thought maybe, just maybe, bear with me, maybe it has something to do with the fact that we just don't want to do them. You see, this is all related to my grand theory of procrastination, or as I like to call it, my unified theory of procrastination in academia. Which must be correct, because it has such an awesome acronym. But this theory kind of refers back to something I called in early comics of the comic strip, something I called the Newton's laws of graduation. So if you're kind of familiar with these already from the website or from the books, bear with me for a second here. But the first law of Newton's laws of graduation says that a graduate student in procrastination tends to stay in procrastination unless an external force is applied to it. This is formalized more now in the second law of graduation, which says that the HA of a doctoral process or master's thesis process is directly proportional to the flexibility F given by the advisor and inversely proportional to the student's motivation M, which we can write as an equation as the age of the thesis equals the flexibility divided by motivation, which we can abbreviate as A equals F over M, which we can rewrite as F equals MA. And everybody knows you can't argue with F equals MA. I want to thank the people who are laughing at this joke. Thank you for laughing at this joke. One time I gave this presentation to a group of arts and social science students. Yeah, that's the equation of the theory of you're giving to do it, divided by the amount of motivation you have to days in undergraduate or high school. Maybe you were one of the better students. Maybe you were near the top of your class even. But then you get to graduate school, and there's not a lot of room at the top. Also, you find out grad school actually makes you dumber, contrary to what was advertised, to what was promised to you. You don't feel smarter, you feel a little dumber, right? Because when you graduate the university, you feel pretty good because the difference, the ratio between what you think you know and what you think you don't know is pretty high, pretty big. You feel good. But then you get to grad school, and you already forgot most of what you learned. But you also kind of realize how much you don't know, right? Because suddenly you're surrounded by all these experts in their fields and all these really brilliant people. And so then what happens to a lot of people is you kind of start to compare yourself. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. That person in your group or your lab or your class that just seems to work all the time, just cranks out all those papers, makes you want to. But don't do it. Don't do it. Trust me. Yeah, you end up comparing yourself to your advisors, to your thesis committee, to your professors, to your peers, to your friends, to your classmates, and you end up feeling like an imposter. So this is actually a very well-documented, well-known phenomenon that happens to a lot of people in academia. It's called the imposter syndrome, which is, when you feel like maybe the only reason they let you into the PhD program was a clerical mistake. That somehow somebody put the paper in the wrong place and your name came up. You feel like you're fooling everybody, that you just don't belong here. Still, you kind of hang in there, and maybe you get excited a little bit about the research project that you picked for your thesis, or the project that was picked for you. But you get kind of excited about it, motivated, right? You kind of feel like it's cool. It's a cool and interesting project, and kind of interesting, until you find out it's impossible. And that somebody already did it. Let's see, maybe you get motivated about your qualifying exams, or your finals, or your PhD candidacy exams. But then you actually pass. And you can't even get out of bed anymore. Still, you hang in there. You hang on for dear life to your motivation. And little by little, you start to claw your way up the motivation chart, little by little. Until you'll get that phone call. That's actually what I was going to say. That's weird. Yeah, you claw your way up the motivation chart, and then you get that phone call one day from your friend. You know which friend I'm talking about, right? That friend of yours that didn't go to grad school, isn't getting their PhDs. And you're on the phone with them, and they're telling you over the phone that, yeah, they have this great life now. They have a job. They make all this money. They just bought a house. Because apparently you can buy houses. What? They just had a baby. They have a family now. They posted all the pictures of the baby on Facebook. In fact, their profile picture is a baby, which is kind of weird. But yeah, they're telling you all these things. Meanwhile, you're on the other line, all by yourself. Alone at night, still in the lab, eating instant noodles, ramen noodles. And before you know it, you've been in grad school longer than you thought you might be, and so that's kind of when things start to look grim for a lot of people. People kind of start to freak out a little bit, because that's kind of when fear sets in. Fear, I think, of a couple of things for a lot of people. First of all, fear of failure. I think a lot of people who do make it this far do tend to be the kind of overachieving type. Maybe they have a lot invested in the people's image of them, or their achievements, or their accomplishments. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to look honestly at yourself and think about when it's better to keep moving on. Of course, the problem is you also kind of get fear of moving on. Right? Because, the PhD can be kind of a comfortable place, relatively speaking. It can be a comfortable place. And so a lot of people kind of hesitate, and they feel like they actually get afraid of what will happen to them if they graduate. Right? Because when you graduate, you have to decide what you want to be when you grow up. And so a lot of people kind of get afraid of rejoining the real world out there beyond the walls of the university. It's kind of like what happens to people in prison. So a lot of people freak out at this point in their PhDs, and they end up procrastinating a lot. They find all these weird hobbies, they end up doing other things, and then they feel guilty and depressed, and that stresses them out, and a lot of people end up dropping out at this point. And so my message to all of you here today is that if you ever find yourself in that position and freaking out a little bit and procrastinating a lot, my message to you here today is that procrastination, it's okay. It's okay because of a very significant point for me in my PhD career, which was I was sort of in that point also. But then I took a class from this professor called Bernie Roth. Now, Bernie Roth is a world-famous authority and expert in the field of robotics and kinematics at Stanford University. Perhaps you've never heard of him. But Bernie Roth is also this kind of groovy 70s kind of dude. And so you would always ask his class, just like I'm going to ask all of you here today, to tell me what are some of the things in life that you have to do. Let's start with that. What are some of the things in life that you have to do?
Sleep.
You have to sleep? Eat?
Stop sleeping.
Stop sleeping. Yeah. What else? Shower? Drink coffee? Yes.
Drink alcohol.
Drink. This is getting dangerous now. No, so Bernie's point was that, he was a professor for many years, and he would always, over the many years he was a professor, he would listen to graduate students, PhD students, even young professors or older professors. He would listen how they use language like that. Like he would listen to them say things like, "Oh man, I'm so stressed. I have to finish this project. I have to get funding. I have to finish this homework. I have to get a good grade. I have to get this published. I have to get a good postdoc so I can have to get a good faculty position." Whereas Bernie's point was that, you know what, in life, there's really nothing that you have to do. Basically, nobody's making you do any of these things. Not even to eat, not even to sleep, not even to not sleep. Not even to not sleep, or not even to drink coffee or alcohol. Basically, nobody's making you do any of these things. Basically, he would say, everything you do, his point was that everything you do it because you want to do it. And so I thought, whoa, that's crazy. If that's true, then I say that procrastination is what you do when you're doing what you want to be doing. Right? If everything you do it because you want to do it, then even procrastination has that sort of equal value, and so it's a good thing, right? Here you just have to smile and nod. Ignore the logical fallacies. Basically, the main message here is that, yeah, you know what, maybe you can just relax a little bit, enjoy it, and listen to your inner procrastinator. Yeah, that's kind of the message of my talk here. Now, some of you might be wondering at this point, you might be wondering, Jorge, all of this procrastination stuff, that's great. Well, how does that help me graduate? What if I never graduate? How does any of this help me get out of Oslo, where I can afford the rent? Well, fortunately for everybody, for everyone, there are other terms in the equation. So as small as this bottom term here may get for you, inevitably this upper term up here will get even smaller. And here I would try to make a joke about L'Hopital's rule. All right. 3 mathematicians would applaud. Great. Anyways, the main point is that basically what happens for everybody is that inevitably, eventually, the final decision to graduate, the final impetus to finish, is basically made for you. Inevitably, you're going to run out of time, you're going to run out of funding, or you're going to run out of time, money, or you're suddenly going to be expecting a baby, or you find a job that you really, really want, or you find your significant other moves to another city, and so all of a sudden you'll be faced with a deadline you will not want to miss. Because one of the things I feel nobody ever tells you about finishing a PhD is that nobody's ever really happy with their PhDs. This is true. If you ask anyone who's finished, even your professors, the postdocs, anyone who's finished, if you ask them if they were 100%, 100.0000000% happy with the final product that they turned in at the end, most likely, I would bet they'll tell you, not 100%. Most likely they'll tell you they ran out of time, they ran out of money, they're expecting a baby, they found a job they really liked, so they had to gather everything they had done up to that point. All the research they had done, anything they could, slapped it all together into this one document, checked that all the margins were the right, very important, guys, the margins were the right size, and then just shipped it out the door. Because the other thing I feel nobody ever tells you about the PhD is that, if you look at anyone who's famous in your fields of research, any of the big names or world-renowned authorities, if you look at the work they're actually famous for, most likely they're not famous for the work they did as graduate students, right? Most likely they're famous for the work they did as professors. It's kind of scary, isn't it? But yeah, right? It's usually later on in their careers, right? When they had grad students do the work for them. That's the key. So yeah, and so at some point you sort of realize all these things, and then you ramp up the motivation chart, and maybe you get to the point up here where you actually defend your thesis, or at least write the outline for your thesis. But then it gets a little bit bumpy, which I don't have time to cover here today. I'll leave that for my future work. Only in academia would anyone laugh at the words future work. Yeah, at some point, I don't have time to cover it, but I will sort of leave you with one last piece of advice. I feel that it's very important for all PhD students to realize. Because, I see a lot of PhD students really stress out because they see their advisors, their professors, as these omnipotent beings looking down upon them and judging their every word and their every move. And so I always like to remind PhD students that, you know what, your professor, well, probably doesn't think you're an idiot, right? Because the fact is that he or she really, they really don't think about you that much. And so just to wrap up here, this is my last slide. And I feel like it's very important for me to end my presentations on this slide because, people see the comics and the presentations and the movies, and they assume that I have a very cynical view about academia and the PhD. And so I always used to get the answer, I used to always get the question, Jorge, do you wish you had never gotten your PhD, or do you wish you had quit your PhD earlier? I always answer no. You know, I'm really glad that I went into the PhD. I'm really glad that I was able to stick with it and finish the degree, because I do feel like I learned a lot of very important skills, a lot of very important, what they're calling now, transferable skills, that I think are going to help you into whatever career you choose for yourselves later on. So very important skills, here they are, starting with most important. You get pretty good at the PowerPoint presentations. Second most important skill I learned in graduate school was how to write bullet item lists. But I think maybe the most significant skill I learned in graduate school was how to give a 1-hour presentation on any topic, even procrastination. Now, I joke around with this list, but I'm actually kind of serious about it. You know, I feel like in the PhD, you learn how to teach yourself anything technical that you need to learn for your research. You know, you become a self-learner, an independent learner. Nobody has to teach you. You learn to take things on for yourself. You learn how to think analytically and be able to break things down into their components. And you also kind of learn the ability to keep in mind the big picture of things and then be able to communicate that to other people. Now everyone's really angry because he had a positive message at the end. So, but I'll leave you with the words of Mike Slakanarny, who said, "Grad school is a state of mind." And which state would that be? Preferably sleeping, which you are interrupting. Now go away. So, thank you.
So, are there any questions? Oh, come on.
So you started the comics as a form of procrastination when you were... So you started the comics as a form of procrastination when you should have been doing your PhD. Now that the comics are obviously providing some kind of livelihood, do you find that it's changed the nature of the comic production in any way?
Oh, so you're asking, how do I procrastinate now? Well, during my PhD, it was very useful because I would procrastinate doing research by doing the comics, and because there was a deadline for the newspaper, I would procrastinate doing the comics by doing research. So if you can get into that mode, you can be very productive. These days, it is my job now to draw comics, and so I still procrastinate for sure. Yeah. For example, I give talks. That's why I'm here. I should be drawing a comic. But no, I usually have many different projects at the same time. I just wrote a book. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's called WeHaveNoIdea.com.
We have it at the science library. We got it from him.
Yeah. I wrote a book. I make videos sometimes as well. And so, yeah, that's usually how I procrastinate doing the comics. But thank you for assuming that they provide a livelihood. Not many people assume that.
Any more questions? Okay.
So on your first or second slide, you had something about 67% of all PhD students has been depressed or something. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah.
You should try to ask also, are you reading PhD comics, and see if there are any correlations.
Like a
not
a
really
control.
a question, but just a tip. I'm very curious about this.
Like a control study. Yes. So I could publish. Yeah. Well, if you want to do it, I fully support it. I just ask for authorship. I don't want to do anything, but I want to be an author.
I'm just wondering, do you miss research?
Do I miss research? I I don't want to say that I don't because I really enjoyed my time. I actually enjoyed my time as a PhD student. There were ups and downs like in the graph, but overall I enjoyed my time as a PhD student. Later on I worked as an instructor and a researcher at Caltech, and I enjoyed that as well. So it's something that I enjoyed. I don't have overly negative feelings about it, but I'm really happy doing what I'm doing now. And so that's how I usually answer.
Were you equally stressed as a researcher, as a PhD student?
Say again?
Were you equally stressed as a researcher at Caltech as you were when you were doing your graduate studies?
Was I equal? Does it get better after you graduate with your PhD? Yes. No. No, it's just it's a very different set of stressors. You know, it's the PhD. The stress is about proving yourself. It's about working out your problem. It's about interacting with your advisor and things like that. Then you graduate and you have all those skills, but then you sort of enter a whole new set of challenges and stressors like funding or getting a job that is permanent. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have time for one last question. Okay.
Great.
Then I would
Thank
really
you.
like to thank you for coming here again. So this is a bottle from the University
cool.
of Oslo.
Thanks.
Norwegian chocolate.
Nice.
And last but not least, have you seen
A
the
spinner!
So that you can
Oh,
procrastinate
thank
even
you.
more.
Awesome. My son is going to love this.
Thank you so much
Yeah,
for coming
thank
and
you.
giving another hand. So this means that PhD Day 2017 is almost at its end. But there's one more thing on the program. We take 5 minutes now so that you can reorganize the furniture, so that you can move the couches up here and buy something more to drink. And then we push play on PhD Movie 2. So please just stay and enjoy the evening. And thank you for coming today.